Kent and Townie sing this song, doo-da, doo-da. Kent and corruption all day long, oh doo-da day. Is it burnt into your brains yet? I want to talk about the Sandra Birchmore case for just a moment. But before I do, I just want to say that reasonable minds can disagree without hating one another. There's plenty of people I disagree with on certain topics, but I still like them as a person. So, what I want to talk about is how Turtle Boy's experience with Lindsay is no way comparable to Sandra Birchmore's experience with Farwell. It's not even close. For starters, in Turtle Boy's situation, it was two consenting adults. And dare I say it, Turtle Boy did consent to having unprotected sex. And so one could say, and I'm sure he admits, that that was a stupid move on his part. And what came of it was a consequence. It wasn't a cause. So when we teach young children how to behave, we teach them by cause and consequence. When you do this behaviour, it causes this consequence. Now when it comes to kids, of course, we're going to focus on positive behaviour is rewarded with positive consequences. But out there in the real world with adults, that's not entirely how it works. It generally boils down to if you make a poor decision, there's generally a bad result or consequence. So just to summarise, in the consenting adult world, if you choose to have unprotected sex with somebody, then you're accepting responsibility for the consequence of that person possibly becoming pregnant. And that isn't to suggest that that person then using it as a weapon against you is the right thing to do. It certainly isn't. But that's not what we're talking about with the Birchmore and Farwell incident, or incidents, as the case may be. What we're looking at there is a closer example of Stockholm Syndrome, where Farwell, a fully grown adult, groomed an inexperienced teenager using what is clearly known as a power imbalance, and then exploited her for his own personal gain. One of the problems here is that the child mind doesn't understand what exploitation is. They're being taught exploitation by their groomer. They're being taught that exploitation is okay. And then once they think it's okay, don't be bloody surprised when they turn around and try to exploit you, if you were the person who taught them that exploitation is okay. Now let's add to that the Stockholm Syndrome. This is a situation where the victim develops a dependency on the aggressor, where they may come to feel like they can't survive without them. And so what we see Sandra do is try to balance the power dynamic by making it clear that she's not going to play ball anymore. She made it clear that there has to be something in it for her as well. Now we can rewind this back to cause and consequence, where had Farwell not done anything wrong, then Birchmore would have nothing to hold over him to try to rebalance the power dynamic. This might be, if you don't tell your wife that you've been sleeping around behind her back, I will tell her. That's the most common power balancing play that you might see between two consenting adults, when one of those consenting adults is married and cheating behind their partner's back. Sandra was not the one who was cheating. Farwell was the one who was cheating. So don't switch that dynamic back to front. The consequences of his own actions are that Sandra knew he was cheating and fully intended to use that knowledge to balance the power indifference between them. Now onto the blackmail portion of the accusation, which I fully understand his lawyers are probably going to try to exploit, as if the kid hasn't been exploited enough. But the bottom line is, if you have unprotected sex with somebody, then you are consenting to raising a child with that person. If not raising the child, then paying for child support. I'm sure our brains don't compute it to that extent when we're in the heat of the moment, but that's the bottom line. It's not blackmail, it's a responsibility. So just to recap, Sandra appears to be a victim, but unaware that she is a victim, and rather than accept that her groomer was doing something illegal and lose him altogether, she came to depend on him. And in recognising that there was a power imbalance between them, she attempted to take some of that control away from him. And these are all very typical behaviours of someone who has been abused from a very young age. Sandra was not an adult who made a conscious decision to have an affair with a married man. She was a child with no experience whatsoever with sexual relationships, and her naivete was taken advantage of by a fully grown adult. What she did as she grew older was simply repeat the cycle of abuse that she had come to know since she was 15 years old. And to point it out as if she was somehow conscious of it, that it was a choice that she made consciously, is the very definition of victim blaming. It's the same as saying, well, she dressed provocatively, therefore she deserved it. She had it coming to her. To suggest that she was somehow doing something wrong, you first have to come to the conclusion that she consciously knew that she was a victim and that she consciously knew she was exploiting or whatever your accusation is. A child who is constantly exploited and abused over a period of time does not realise that they are a victim. The things that Sandra was saying to other people tends to suggest that she didn't think she was a victim and all she wanted was Farwell all to herself, not sharing him with his wife. It seems to me that everything she was saying and doing was to keep him in her life, and if you don't understand that, if you think it was something else like blackmail, then I would suggest you look up Stockholm Syndrome and understand the studies that have been done on this topic and its relationship to trauma bonding, as well as how trauma like this impacts maturity in children. And you should be able to come to the same conclusion that regardless what she did, when a grown man, empowered as a law enforcement officer with the public trust, grooms and manipulates a 13-year-old into eventually having a sexual relationship, and then anything the child does as a result cannot, will not, and simply is not regarded as wrongdoing by the child. And trying to make it appear as if that is the case is victim blaming. Prefacing it with, this is not victim blaming, but is still victim blaming. Anyway, that's my rant for today. Whatever reason you gave your brain to think that Sandra Birchmore somehow did something wrong is an issue in your brain. It's not because Sandra did anything wrong. There's a myriad of self-help YouTube channels out there that you can refer to if you really need to rectify this kind of thing in your own brain. That's a personal choice that you would have to make yourself, but you would have to first accept that Sandra did nothing wrong. The bottom line is she didn't, and there is no law-abiding country in the world that would say she did, simply because of all of the research and human behavioural analysis that we have done as modern societies to uncover what is normal human behaviour and what isn't. Anyway, my apologies in advance if I have inadvertently insulted you. That was not my intention. My intention is to educate people on these sort of topics. That is all.